From MTN, the Montana Television Network, this is Face the State.
Welcome to Face the State. I'm David Parker, MTN Political Analyst, joined as always by Mike Dennison, MTN Chief Political Reporter. Today we are joined by Montana Republican Party Chairman Jeff Essman and Nancy Keenan, the Executive Director of the Montana Democratic Party, to discuss the upcoming general election, the role of their parties in the process, and to discuss the issues facing Montana voters. Jeff, Nancy, thanks for coming on the show today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for the invitation.
So I have just a general broad question, and I guess I'll start with you, Jeff. Is what does it actually mean to be a Republican?
Well, I think we're in a state of flux on that in the national level right now. We've had a pretty traditional Republican stool that had social conservative, fiscal conservative votes, and a strong military as all planks of the party. Obviously, Mr. Trump has, shaken things up on the political stage in this country, as has Bernie on the other side of the aisle. So we will see what the new platform comes out like, and what if Mr. Trump does or does not have any permanent impact on the Republican Party, coming out of November.
So tell us more about what it means to be a Republican in Montana. What do Republicans stand for in Montana? Where do they want to take the state?
I think our overarching goals right now are to focus on, a couple of things, which I think are the focus of Republican voters nationwide. And that, number one, that's jobs in the economy. And then number two, that's safety. And I do believe that, we are our candidates at the top of the ticket for president, for governor, for Congress, are all going to be focused on those issues. That's typically what most people vote on in the fall, those top two items. So it's going to be jobs in the economy and safety.
But there's been a split within the Republican Party here in the state. We saw it during the primary season, and there were some Republicans that didn't feel welcomed at the convention. So what do you need to do to bring the party together?
Well, as party chairman, it's my job to continue to invite all Republicans, all stripes, to feel welcome, participate in our process, and then, of course, listen to their concerns and make sure that I run the formal functions of the party fairly. I do believe that if we elect a Republican governor, that will do a lot in terms of bringing Republicans together, because you will have one individual who's charting a positive path that will work to unite people of various points of the Republican spectrum on a common agenda.
But doesn't Mr. Gianforte identify more with the conservative wing of the party? And is there any concern on your part, or Republicans in general, that all Republicans may not support Mr. Gianforte, which I think he probably needs to win the election?
I would call Mr. Gianforte pretty pragmatic. I believe our statewide candidates, Congressman Zinke is on the ballot again, Tim Fox. I think most of our statewide candidates are pretty pragmatic when it comes to their politics and the stance they take on issues. And I think they'll appeal to voters of all stripes.
But Nancy, looking at the Democratic Party, you're in an odd situation, where one of the candidates running for the nomination is himself not a Democrat. Mm-hmm. Is Bernie Sanders a Democrat? What does it mean to be a Democrat in Montana?
Well, there's two questions there. Bernie Sanders, you'll have to ask him what he considers himself. It's interesting that he says that he's running as a Democrat, but the question is better served to Bernie. I think in Montana, we're defined by our values. And the values of the Montana Democratic Party is, I think, very Main Street Montana. And that includes very much about working families and how we make sure that jobs are available for them. It makes sure that our public lands are accessible to all Montanans, and that we're not trading or selling them off. Infrastructure has been a big discussion by Governor Bullock and Democratic legislators. I think, again, that's something that when we talk about economic development in this state, it is truly around how we have to rebuild, whether it's those streets and bridges and our schools, which are in dire need of a lot of capital improvement. So our values about hunting, fishing, hiking, camping, our values around jobs in the middle class, our values around making sure that our kids have a quality education. And all of that is, I think, reflective and in the fabric of Montanans.
You know, one thing you didn't mention too much in there is talking about the conservation community, environmentalists who are a core constituency of the party. I'm just wondering if that has hurt you in rural areas, because in rural areas of Montana, I mean, the Democratic Party, I mean, it's almost persona non grata. I mean, you just get killed in most of the rural areas. How are you going to fix that, and how are Democrats going to start winning in those areas and perhaps win the legislature of the?
You know, I think there is a love of the land here in this state, and I don't care if it's rural Montana or more urban centers. And I think that you see that in that farmers and agricultures are the primary caretakers of the land. Now, I think sometimes we haven't done a great job in explaining the values of Montana Democrats and how I think that Montanans in the rural parts of our state are very aligned to us. And so I'll take ownership in some of that I think that if they line us up now, especially given the state of the Republican Party and being divided, at the national level, a guy that's running in Mr. Trump that is divisive, that's not the Montana way. We work together to solve problems. We work across the aisle to solve problems. And I think that we just need to do a better job in rural Montana in talking about getting things done versus constantly fighting in the divisiveness that we've seen at the national level and at the Republican Party here at the state level. So we got to do a better job at it.
But what specifically do you have to offer rural Montana in terms of economic development? I think that often your party is seen as the enemy of coal or of mining or even ag, oil and gas, timber perhaps, which provides a lot of great jobs in rural Montana.
Yeah, so let's look at that. 4 Democrats on the land board. $112 million in new coal production on state lands, $49 million in oil and gas, something like $60-some million in timber sales. So this business about Democrats are not, supportive of natural resource extraction and those industries is a false premise. We have the majority on the land board: Governor Bullock, Monica Lindeen, Linda McCullough, Denise Juneau. And those are the kinds of jobs that they have been very proactive on in the resource industry. So I think, again, we've got to do a better job of explaining that to people in rural parts of this state.
For Democrats to be competitive in the fall, nationally, but also here in Montana, you got to bring over young voters. Young voters were huge behind Bernie Sanders, and now they're faced with a nominee that does not excite them. In fact, both of you have a big problem. We have historically 2 of the most unpopular individuals ever leading a major party. So how are you going to basically get those young voters to come over to support Hillary Clinton, who seems to be, from their point of view, a voice from the past?
His name is Donald Trump. His name is Donald Trump. And when you have somebody that is that divisive, a generation of young people that are more diverse than any time in the history of this country, when you have young people who care about the environment, who care about those jobs in technology and the kind of emerging economy that's coming, those young people are going to come flying to Hillary Clinton because of the divisive, abusive, reckless, dangerous candidate that Donald Trump is in this country. And so I have every confidence that both at the state level, because we look at our candidates: Steve Bullock, young; Denise Juneau, young. They are energizing people in this state that I haven't seen, quite honestly, since I ran in 2000.
So let's flip it around, Jeff, all right? Nancy says Donald Trump's going to help her party. How are you guys going to deal with Donald Trump? Does he help or hurt your candidates here in Montana?
Well, I think if you think things have been going great in this country for the last 25, 30 years in terms of middle class income and middle class job growth, I mean, then I think you're going to support Hillary Clinton. But if you're like many Americans that are totally frustrated with what's happened to their opportunity, if you're a young person that's frustrated with the debt you come out of school with and the inability to find a decent paying job in Montana or elsewhere in this country, you're going to say the solutions of the last 30 years have been a failure. And why in the world would you want to vote for a candidate who's been in Washington longer than the average Montanan has been alive? You know, you're not going to go that way. You're going to take a chance. You're going to vote for somebody who thinks that the status quo needs to be shaken up.
Well, let's talk about experience for a minute. Let's talk about experience. Donald Trump didn't even know what the nuclear triad is, which sits outside of Great Falls, Montana, and our nuclear missile sites. That scares me. That scares me that this guy didn't even know what it was. So experience to me is critical in this. And qualification. She's been at the State Department. She has some of that experience in the military. I get a little anxious, and I think most Montanans do as well, that this guy, Mr. Trump, is just erratic and reckless. And is that what this country needs in this very volatile time in the world? Is somebody that can't even, from point A to point B, decide where he stands on anything.
Well, despite what you say about Mr. Trump, I mean, I think he's probably going to win this state, perhaps by a large margin. So you as Democrats are going to have to get a lot of people who may vote for Trump to turn around and vote for Steve Bullock and other Democrats. How do you do that?
That's the beauty of Montana. That is the beauty of Montana, Mike. We have this wonderful independent streak in us, and that we do ticket splitting. Yes, it is true that in the past, Republican presidential candidates have done very well in Montana. But we elected Max Baucus, we've elected John Tester, we've elected Steve Bullock and Brian Schweitzer. We have 4 statewide elected officials. We've gained seats in the Montana legislature because Montana voters, I don't think, always just align to a party. They align to a value system, and they align to what they believe can move the state forward versus taking it back. And so I have every confidence with Steve at the top of the ticket and Denise that people they just don't fall in line in this state. They are independent thinkers, and I think that's good for us.
So Jeff, looking back at 2008, I remember the arguments very clearly that you had John McCain, top of the ticket, who had a tremendous amount of experience, and a lot of people respected that experience that he had in the U.S. Senate, and also prior to coming to the U.S. Senate. And you had Barack Obama, who had very little experience. And one of the arguments Republicans made repeatedly is that a lot of the mess we've gotten ourselves into is because we had an inexperienced person at the helm. Now we're going into a general election where not only do we have an inexperienced presidential nominee, we also have a gubernatorial nominee who has no governing experience at all. Is that a subject of concern that we should be worried about?
You know, I think if you focus on the critical issues, and that's jobs and the economy and safety, you know, the thumb's going to come down on the Republican side of these races. I mean, we have experienced candidates on the Republican seat. They've run for statewide offices, all of them, except our governor's candidate, Mr. Gianforte. If we are looking for leaders that are going to improve our future opportunity in terms of creating jobs, in terms of making America and Montana more safe, I think people are going to be looking at our Republican candidates. I mean, Steve Bullock is going to, if Hillary Clinton is elected president, you know, she'll be nominating Supreme Court justices that may see the Second Amendment in a different light. Steve Bullock vetoed a bill that would have said our sheriffs and our city police do not need to support the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms when they come to grab guns in this state. You know, I think it's going to be that type of issue that is going to be on the mind of these voters in the middle in Montana, and we do need to appeal to them. But we need to offer opportunity for jobs, better economy, and personal safety.
Let's be clear about who, under which Republican or Democrat. Steve Bullock had an infrastructure bill, bipartisan, worked across the aisle, defeated by 1 vote. Republicans, all across the state. Most of that money was going to rural Montana for sewage systems, school systems, for water systems. And so this jobs in the economy, we have a lowest unemployment rate, one of the lowest unemployment, in fact 1% lower than the national rate. More jobs, we have $300 million in the bank that's under Steve Bullock's leadership has been able to maintain a really fiscally responsible administration. And so again, there's a bogus argument about jobs in the economy. It's just like, look at the record. Look at the record of this governor and what he has done in working across the aisle to solve the problems in the state, and not the same old rhetoric that we get both at the national level and from Republicans here in this state.
But we have had declines in the natural resource industries, and I want to ask you something, Jeff, about that. That's part of the core message of Republicans. They want to develop those industries more. What does that mean exactly? I mean, you basically had control of the legislature for a couple of decades, sometimes Republican governors. What else do you need to accomplish this goal?
You know, in terms of management of the federal lands, we need we need better leadership in Washington in terms of allowing our force to actually be multiple use. The allies of the Democratic Party are in court constantly. They have been for the last 50 years to drive the loggers out of our national forests. And that's why you've got timber counties like Mineral County, Sanders County. These counties are dealing with 14, 15, 16% unemployment rates. These, and this is a challenge. The Democrat National Committee and their allies have turned their back on people who work with their hands.
But
they have walked away from them.
But those are federal issues. I'm wondering on a state level, what hasn't been done that needs to be done to encourage these industries?
Well, we need a governor that's going to fight for policies, is going to engage the federal government, and not be subservient to a national political line.
Let's go back.
And that's the question. Is Steve Bullock going to challenge Hillary Clinton if she's president? I doubt it very much. He's supporting her election. We need a governor in this state who will challenge Hillary Clinton on all these issues, whether it's guns, personal safety, or the management of our federal lands.
But let's be clear about what you were asking. What can happen in this state? A land board that is for Democrats has leased more for coal production, oil production, and timber production on state lands in this state for Democrats. So let's be clear about that. The second thing is, this is the party that wants to trade or sell our state lands. And in this state, which is a fabric, it's woven into our fabric, the hunting, the fishing, the hiking, all of that is who we are in this state. And these guys are talking again at the federal level and at the state level. Oh, let's transfer it, let's sell it because we can do it better. It's going to be sold to the highest bidder. That's what's going to happen. If their policies as a Republican Party, state or federal, happens, it's going to be sold. And instead of having a place where we hunt and fish and camp, it's going to have a Trump sign out there in the middle of somewhere along the Smith River because it's going to be sold to the highest bidder.
Now that is a total fabrication. Nobody wants to sell public lands, and no one wants to block public access. This is a meme that's a lie that's been put out there repeatedly because Democrats, frankly, don't have anything to talk about in terms of improving jobs or the economy. So, I'm surprised we're not bringing back. Republicans want to destroy Social Security again. I guess it's early in the election cycle. We'll probably get to that before it's over.
But let's take this issue that you brought up, Nancy, and Jeff, you came back with, this question about who is best able to manage public land. And I spend a lot of time in public lands, and I've been to the public lands and parks in Utah, and let me tell you, they do a heck of a good job managing those lands, and I would rather camp on a Utah state park land than on a national forest land. So why couldn't we basically let the states manage public lands more actively instead of the federal government?
Because we can't afford it. And the number one reason is fire season, and we're coming into that right now. And I would venture to say that if this state explodes, and it's a partnership with the federal government, that if we had to pay, as taxpayers, out of our pocket to pay for fires on federal land, we'd go broke. We'd go broke. And I think that that's the issue, that there is a partnership between the federal government and the state government on those lands, that we manage them, and that we share the cost when something like fire season broke out. We've got 2 fires in this state right now. But these forests are only going to explode in fire because of bad federal management. If you look at a patch of national forest next to a patch of state forest, you'll see the national forest is red and gray because it hasn't been managed, because the people have been kicked off of that land. You look at the state forest, it's green. That's what good state management can do, and we need that here. These forests in Montana are subject to explode in fire because of bad federal management policy that's been perpetrated on the state by national Democrats and their allies. Great. Thanks for giving Steve the credit here on state management, great management of state land. That's his administration, and before that, Brian Schweitzer. So, we do manage our state lands very well. I think we do. I'd go back to, who's got the plan here? Who's got a plan on energy in the state? Steve Bullock. Who's got a plan on infrastructure in the state? Steve Bullock. Who's got a plan on jobs in the economy? Steve Bullock. The other side, I hear all this rhetoric about what's happening at the national level. I live in Montana. I work in Montana. I was born and raised in Montana. And that's where I think the Democratic Party says, we can solve our problems here. We have to work with the federal government. We're not always going to agree. We don't fall in line and are limited and kind of follow whoever's leading the pack here. we stand up for what we believe is best for Montana, and I think the governor has done that. I think Denise Juneau has done that, and the other great Democrats that we've elected in this state.
But Jeff, I mean, two questions here. One, are Republicans trying to nationalize this election? Is that to your benefit? And two, I mean, Republicans do have plans to do things in Montana, and don't they?
We have, the Republicans have successfully won legislative races and public service commission races, for the last 20 years in this state. I think we do that because we listen to our voters, and one of the things we're hearing is a frustration, with national policies in terms of, how these lands are managed. I mean, 50 years ago, the effort was to lock the forest to the loggers. Well, now, padlocks are going up and you can't even get into the forest to hunt or hunt for huckleberries. So, these are long-term strategies. We can manage our own federal lands very well. We think if we have a Republican land board, all 5 seats, we will do an outstanding job of managing those forests and creating more opportunity. I would point out that of the vaunted coal effort, our coal shipments from Montana were down about 30% the first quarter of this year. They're down, and that's because of national policies. We are going to be left out of this economy. We need a forward-thinking leader like Greg Gianforte who can get us into the information technology economy. We need to get there. He's led the way in terms of things like Code Montana. He's led the way in terms of offering scholarships to these trade schools. Because people that work with their hands are important, and we need to recognize them, and I think the Republican Party is going to be a natural home for them in the future.
We might manage them if the Republicans have their way and federal lands or they want to manage or sell or trade, they may manage them, but I'm telling you, Montanans aren't going to have access, because the minute you trade and sell, and other states have done it, it's been a failed policy. Mr. Gianforte is one that has denied people access, sued the state government on that, and the fact, makes some kind of mark, well, come on down. Well, come on down. We don't have to ask, as the governor said, we don't have to ask permission. They're our lands. They're the people's
Mr. Gianforte never blocked access to that river, never. A padlock never went up. Nobody was ever denied walking to that stream. That whole struggle was over where the path was located. And after a year and a half of waiting for a poorly managed fish and game department to come down and look at where the path was, they admitted it was in the wrong place. Access was never denied. Nobody wants to sell public lands, and nobody wants to deny access. This is just a repeat of a lie.
I'm going to push both of you on 2 issues. And I'll start with Nancy, since you brought up the public access lawsuit. I looked at the lawsuit, and it just so happens that my dad was a title insurance executive for a major title insurance company. And you know what? There's always disputes about whether or not easements are publicly transferred or transferred appropriately when a property is bought and sold. Why is it absolutely not appropriate for Greg Gianforte to bring in an attorney to adjudicate a dispute? This is what people do in a civilized society. There was a dispute about where the easement was, and it looks like the easement wasn't properly conveyed at closing. Why is this a problem? Why is this a big deal?
Because it's the Montana way first to go talk to people across that table and have a conversation before you call your lawyer. And I think that is the Montana way.
Maybe he did that already. He says he did that first, and that didn't work, so that's why I hired a lawyer.
Well, you hire a lawyer, but I still think that you have a dispute, you go up there to the department, you keep talking and trying to figure it out. And to me, it is like you can't have it both ways. You can't say there's great management of state lands, but by God, Fish and Game messed up. But by God, they're not managing it all because they made a mistake. Look, I believe that the Republican Party wants to sell and or transfer state lands. It's in the platform. It has been introduced by Republican legislators. And in Montana, I think that is just strikes at the very heart of who we are.
Sale of our public lands is not in the Montana Republican platform. That's it, beginning and end. There is not a sentence there that says that the Republican Party supports the sale of public lands. We don't.
Jeff, you have brought up the issue of safety a couple times today. So let me actually play a clip from the debate this weekend between Greg Gianforte and Steve Bullock that happened up in Big Sky. So play that clip.
This is a really clear distinction between myself and my opponent, because I called from day one last fall when Obama forced this refugee resettlement program on the state of Montana to call an immediate halt. The governor has not responded. In fact, he said he would welcome these individuals. Now, my heart goes out to those families, young people and women who are dislocated because of war. We have this problem primarily because of a lack of leadership at the federal level, but we don't need to complicate it by bringing unvetted Syrian refugees into our state. I have concern for them, but it doesn't extend so far as to actually move them into our homes and our communities.
So in that clip, Greg Gianforte mentioned unvetted Syrian refugees. And in several tweets that the Montana Republican Party sent out talking about unvetted Syrian refugees. But that is false. I mean, the Heritage Foundation, several organizations said they are vetted. So when are you guys going to stop talking about unvetted Syrian refugees?
Well, I think when Montana voters quit worrying about it. You know, when the chief of the CIA and the chief of the FBI say, you know, we really don't have effective means of vetting these people, I think the ineffective vetting is a concern to Montanans. So, you know, it is important to recognize that it is true. We don't know who these people are. It is true that ISIS has said they're going to use these refugee populations to try to introduce their warriors into Europe and America, and I think the people of this country have every right to be concerned about it.
Now, there may be a problem with the vetting process, but they are vetted. There's a 18 to 24 month process that they do go through before they even let into the U.S. Isn't that true?
You know, I will rely on the chief of the CIA who says he doesn't have an effective means to know who these people are. That's the critical element. I think that's what is stuck in everybody's minds.
Of course, Governor Bullock has not closed the door to Syrian refugees or any refugees in Montana. What's the feeling of most Democrats about this issue, and is it an issue?
Well, I think obviously security is the #1 priority. There's no doubt about that, whether we're sitting here in Montana or I think the country. I think Dave's right, and he's written about it, that the fact is that there is an extensive vetting process for people that come into this country. And in fact, for refugees, it is anywhere from 1.5 to 7 years before they are actually here at our door or our borders. I think that this is an issue of false claims, as though you're operating on people's fears and misinformation, because really what is happening here is that this country was built on people coming to this country and not allowing terrorists to basically panic people, because that's what they want. They want us to absolutely close down every value we have as a country. That's when terrorists are successful. But Dave, you're right. I mean, this is something that is false. There is a vetting process. It is an extensive vetting process. It takes people a long time. And I think that the politics of Zinke and the Republican parties right now is just operating on the fear that people have, as though different people that come to this country are all terrorists for some reason.
So, Nancy, when your Irish forefathers came to this country, my German forefathers came to this country, they did not have home bases that had the avowed purpose of destroying the American culture. They came to be part of this culture. That's the issue. Are we introducing people that do not want to be part of this culture?
We end today on a disagreement. But again, we'll see this fought out into the fall election. And I want to thank you both for joining us today on Face the State. And we'll see you hopefully again next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You've been watching Face the State, a presentation of MTN, the Montana Television Network.